A 6-year-old child walked through the darkness of the Tuscan hills in 1968, his clothes soaked in his mother's blood, while the man later convicted of the crime sat in a prison cell years later, watching the same gun kill again and again with surgical, ritualistic precision. This is the forensic impossibility of the Monster of Florence, a case where every arrest was a failure and every suspect was merely a piece of a much larger, darker puzzle. The cold truth begins not with a madman, but with a mechanical signature, a Beretta Series 70 semi-automatic pistol chambered in .22 long rifle, firing Winchester Series H rimfire cartridges. This specific weapon, with its unique ballistic fingerprint, would become the only constant in a 17-year reign of terror that redefined the limits of human depravity. On the night of August 21st, 1968, the silence of the Signa countryside was broken by 8 shots. Inside a small car, Antonio Lobianco and Barbara Lacci were murdered in what initially appeared to be a crime of passion. Lacci was a woman known for her numerous lovers, and the immediate suspect was her husband, Stefano Mele. The anomaly that night was Natalino Mele, Barbara's young son, who was sleeping in the back seat. After the shots were fired, the boy somehow ended up at a farmhouse miles away, claiming a tall man had carried him there on his shoulders. Stefano Mele was eventually convicted, confessing to the crime in a series of contradictory statements that pointed to various lovers of his wife. He was a simple man, easily manipulated, and the case seemed closed. But the gun, the Beretta that fired those 8 shots, was never found. It vanished into the shadows of the Tuscan hills, waiting for its next opportunity to strike. That opportunity came 6 years later, on September 14, 1974, in Borgo San Lorenzo. The victims were Pasquale Gentilcore and Stefania Pettini. This was no longer a simple double homicide. It was the birth of a ritual. Pasquale was shot multiple times before being stabbed, but the true horror was reserved for Stefania. She was stabbed 96 times, her body positioned in a way that suggested a perverse ceremonial intent. A wine bottle was inserted into her, and the killer spent a significant amount of time at the scene, undisturbed by the proximity of the road. This was the first time the investigators' eyes were opened to the possibility of a ritualistic element, a shift from a crime of passion to a cold, calculated performance of violence. The forensic link was immediate. The shell casings found at the scene bore the same H stamp as those from the 1968 murder. The same gun, the same ammunition, but a completely different level of ritualistic sophistication. The investigation into the 1974 murder was a labyrinth of dead ends. The police were looking for a lone maniac, someone with a deep-seated hatred for young couples. But the 7-year silence that followed suggested something else. A killer who was either incarcerated, out of the country, or capable of immense self-control. This gap in the timeline is one of the most significant re-hooks in the case. Why did the monster stop? Or perhaps, why did the monster choose to restart? The silence was broken on June 6, 1981 in Scandicci. Giovanni Foghi and Carmela De Nuccio were the targets. The MO was now refined. The killer shot the couple through the car window with the same .22 Beretta, but this time he added a new, horrifying signature. He used a sharp blade to excise the pubic area of Carmela De Nuccio. This was not a frenzied act. It was a surgical removal, performed with a steady hand and a clear purpose. The excision was precise, suggesting that the killer had some level of anatomical knowledge, or at the very least, a very specific goal in mind. The re-emergence of the 1968 weapon sent shockwaves through the Italian legal system. Stefano Mele was still in prison, yet the gun that had theoretically been used in the crime he confessed to was now back on the streets, being used by a killer who was escalating in both frequency and brutality. The logic of the lone maniac was being challenged by the forensic reality of the weapon's history. On October 22, 1981, just 4 months after the Scandicci murder, the monster struck again in Calenzano. The victims were Stefano Baldi and Antonella Migliorini. The pattern remained consistent: a quiet, secluded spot, a young couple in a car, the Beretta .22, and the ritualistic excision of the female victim's reproductive organs. The pressure on the Florentine authorities was mounting. A special task force, the Squadra Antimostro, was formed, but they were chasing a shadow that seemed to know their every move. In June 1982, the monster struck in Montesbertoli. The victims were Paolo Mainardi and Antonella Migliorini. However, this time, something went wrong. Paolo Mainardi, despite being shot, managed to put the car in reverse and drive it into a ditch, potentially interrupting the killer's ritual. The monster fired more shots into the car, killing both, but the usual surgical removals did not take place. This deviation from the MO provided a brief, flickering hope for the investigators. Did the monster panic, or was he simply forced to abandon his prize? The forensic evidence remained the same. The H-stamped shell casings, the .22 caliber, the mechanical precision of the Beretta. Every piece of evidence pointed back to a weapon that had officially been accounted for in 1968, yet was now the instrument of a serial killer's spree. The year 1983 brought a chilling pivot in the monster's logic. In Galuzzo, two German tourists, Horst Meyer and Uwe Rusch, were found murdered in their Volkswagen camper. At first glance, this seemed like a mistake. The monster usually targeted heterosexual couples. Why would he kill two men? The theory arose that the killer, seeing the long hair of one of the tourists, mistook them for a couple. But the cold truth suggests something more analytical. The camper was parked in a spot that was difficult to observe from the outside. The killer would have had to get very close to be sure of his targets. This murder, perhaps more than any other, suggested that the monster wasn't just looking for sex, he was looking for a specific type of victim, or perhaps he was simply testing his own boundaries. The surgical excision was impossible in this case, but the Beretta and the H ammunition confirmed the killer's identity. By 1984, the monster had become a national obsession. The fear in Florence was palpable. On July 29th, in Vicchio, Claudio Stefanacci and Pia Rontini were the next to fall. The brutality was escalating. Pia Rontini's body was subjected to the most extensive excision yet, including the removal of her left breast. This was a significant escalation in the ritualistic removal of body parts. The killer was no longer just taking a trophy, he was collecting specific anatomical sections with the care of a surgeon or a taxidermist. The investigation was now looking into doctors, veterinarians, and anyone with access to surgical tools. The theory of the commissioned removal began to take shape. Was the monster acting on his own, or was he providing these ritualistic removals for someone else? The final, and perhaps most significant, murder occurred in September 1985 in the woods of Skopeti. The victims were Jean-Michel Kravachvili and Nadine Moriot, a French couple camping in a tent. This was another deviation. The monster usually attacked cars, but this time he cut through the fabric of a tent to reach his victims. Jean-Michel managed to run for his life, but he was hunted down and killed in the bushes. Nadine was subjected to the same horrific excisions, but the monster didn't stop there. He sent a taunting letter to the prosecutor, Silvia Della Monica, containing a piece of Nadine's breast. This was a direct challenge to the state, a declaration of superiority. It was also the end of the killings. The Beretta Series 70 went silent, never to be heard from again. The investigation that followed was a chaotic attempt to find a scapegoat. The police eventually focused on Pietro Pacciani, a man known as the Beast. Pacciani was a violent, uneducated farmer with a history of domestic abuse and a previous conviction for murder. He seemed like the perfect lone maniac. However, the evidence against him was circumstantial at best. A single, unspent H-bullet was found in his garden, which many believed had been planted by the police. Pacciani was convicted, then acquitted on appeal, then ordered to be retried before he died under mysterious circumstances in 1998. The prosecution then pivoted to the snack buddies, Mario Vanni and Giancarlo Lotti, two of Pacciani's associates who were portrayed as accomplices in a series of commissioned murders. This is where the case enters the realm of the second level. Giancarlo Lotti, a man with a low IQ, confessed to being part of a group that committed the murders, claiming they were paid by a doctor to provide body parts for satanic rituals. This testimony led to the conviction of Vanni and Lotti, but it left the most important questions unanswered. Who was the doctor? Who was the mastermind behind the Order of the Red Rose? Michele Giuttari, a lead investigator in the later years, uncovered evidence of a high society cult that included prominent figures in Florence, doctors, lawyers, and even high-ranking officials. He proposed that Pacciani and his snack buddies were merely the low-level operatives, the muscle hired to do the dirty work, while the true monster remained protected by the very system that was supposed to catch him. The forensic evidence supports this theory of a broader conspiracy. The Beretta used in 1968, the surgical precision of the removals, and the ability of the killer to evade capture for nearly 2 decades all point to someone with resources, intelligence, and protection. The 1968 murder of Barbara Lacci and Antonio Lobianco was likely the origin story of the weapon, a gun that belonged to a specific circle of people who passed it down or used it as a shared instrument of ritual. The official version, that a group of uneducated peasants committed these complex surgical crimes, defies the cold truth. The Monster of Florence was not a man, it was an entity, a shadow cast by the elite of Tuscany, a ritualistic machine that stopped only when the heat became too great or the purpose of the rituals was fulfilled. To this day, the true mastermind, the one who commissioned the removals and ensured the silence of the witnesses, remains unknown, a ghost in the machine of Italian justice. The gun remains missing, the body parts were never recovered, and the hills of Florence keep their secrets, reminding us that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we refuse to see, even when they are hiding in plain sight.
The narrative of the Monster of Florence is a testament to the failure of traditional profiling. We want to believe in the lone, broken individual because a lone individual can be caught, understood, and neutralized. But the surgical precision of the 1984 excision of Pia Rontini or the 1985 removal of Nadine Morio's breast suggests a hand that was not shaking with rage, but steady with professional intent. The H-stamped Winchester ammunition, a rare and specific choice, points to a person with a deep connection to the world of firearms, someone who didn't just stumble upon a gun, but selected a tool for its reliability and its history. The 1968 connection is the ultimate open loop. If Stefano Mele didn't have the gun, who did? And how did that gun find its way through 17 years of shifting social and political landscapes to continue its work?
The snack buddies theory, while legally convenient, collapses under the weight of logical analysis. Mario Vanni and Giancarlo Lotti were men who lived on the margins of society, often intoxicated and barely capable of organizing a meal, let alone a series of high-stakes, cross-jurisdictional murders. The idea that they could navigate the complex geography of Tuscany, identify victims, carry out the attacks with surgical precision, and escape without leaving a single trace of DNA or a witness is a fantasy. Lotti's confession, filled with inconsistencies and prompted by leading questions, serves more as a window into the desperation of the authorities than a reliable account of the crimes. The cold truth is that the investigators were looking down when they should have been looking up.
The investigation led by Michele Giuttari into the second level was an attempt to bridge this gap. He looked into the suspicious death of Francesco Narducci, a prominent doctor from Perugia, whose body was found in Lake Trasimeno shortly after the final monster murder in 1985. Narducci was rumored to be part of the cult that commissioned the body parts, and his death, officially ruled a suicide, bore the marks of a cover-up. Giuttari's findings suggested that the body recovered from the lake was not Narducci's, but a double, and that the real doctor had been disposed of to prevent him from talking. This is the heart of the Red Rose theory, a satanic or perhaps simply nihilistic elite that used the snack buddies as a screen for their own perverse rituals.
Every 500 words, the case presents a new contradiction. We are told the monster is a peasant, yet he excises organs with the skill of a surgeon. We are told the gun was lost in 1968, yet it appears in 1974 with the same ballistic signature. We are told the case is solved, yet the most important questions, the whereabouts of the weapon and the identity of the mastermind, remain unanswered. This is the information gap that refuses to close. The Monster of Florence represents the ultimate delay of gratification in true crime. There is no final confession from the real mastermind, no recovery of the surgical tools, no closure for the families who lost their children to the shadows of the Tuscan hills. The 1983 murder of the German tourists remains the most glaring forensic anomaly. If the monster was after the female essence for a ritual, why kill two men? The traditional answer, mistaken identity, is too simple for a killer who was otherwise so meticulous. A more analytical approach suggests that the 1983 murder was a message, or perhaps a diversion. The killer was operating under immense pressure by then. The police were everywhere. Perhaps he needed to strike just to prove he still could. Or perhaps he was fulfilling a contract that didn't specify the gender of the victims, but merely the act of the kill itself. This is the terrifying reality of the commissioned removals. The victims were not people to the monster. They were biological material, ordered and delivered with the cold efficiency of a business transaction. As we look back at the timeline, from the first shots in Signa to the final letter in Scopetti, a chilling realization takes hold. The monster was not just a killer, he was a choreographer of fear. He chose his locations with a deep knowledge of the terrain, the lovers' lanes of Florence, where couples sought privacy but found only death. He knew the habits of the police, the rhythm of the city, and the weaknesses of the legal system. He manipulated the media, taunted the prosecutors, and used the snack buddies as a human shield against the truth. The 1985 letter containing the piece of Nadine Moriot's breast was the final flourish of a performer who knew his show was over. He had achieved his goal, whether it was a series of rituals, a political statement, or a personal vendetta, and he walked away into the fog of history.
The cold truth of the Monster of Florence is that the investigation was as much a part of the horror as the crimes themselves. The infighting between different branches of the Italian police, the leaking of sensitive information, the planting of evidence, and the intimidation of witnesses created an environment where the truth was the first casualty. The case became a mirror reflecting the corruption and the deep-seated class divisions of Italian society. On one side, the peasants and the outcasts, easily blamed and quickly forgotten. On the other, the invisible elite, protected by their status and their connections, watching the spectacle from the safety of their villas.
The reveal, the ultimate synthesis of this 17-year nightmare, is that there was no monster in the sense of a singular biological entity. There was only the gun, the rituals, and the circle of people who moved within the shadows. The monster was a collaborative effort, a shared darkness that utilized the physical prowess of men like Pacciani and the surgical knowledge of people like the mastermind to achieve an end that we can still only dimly perceive. The Order of the Red Rose may be a name given by investigators, but the underlying reality of a high society conspiracy is the only explanation that fits the forensic and historical data. The mystery remains because the people who hold the answers are the ones who control the narrative. The hills of Florence are beautiful, sun-drenched and peaceful, but beneath the surface lies the memory of the Beretta .22, the H-stamped bullets, and the cold, mechanical heart of a monster that was never truly caught.
The 1968 case of Antonio Lobianco and Barbara Lacci is the key that was never turned. If the authorities had looked closer at the connections between the lovers of Barbara Lacci and the higher circles of Florentine society, the spree might have been stopped before the ritual of 1974 ever began. Instead, they took the easy path, convicting a man who clearly couldn't have been the one who carried the child miles through the woods. This initial failure of logic created the vacuum that the monster filled. Every subsequent murder was a consequence of that first convenient lie. The monster didn't just kill couples, he killed the credibility of the Italian justice system.
The surgical removal of body parts, particularly the excisions of 1981, 1984, and 1985, are the most visceral evidence of the commissioned theory. To perform such a task in the dark, in the cramped space of a car or a tent, requires more than just a sharp knife. It requires a level of sang-froid and technical skill that is far beyond the reach of a drunken farmer. The placement of the incisions, the preservation of the surrounding tissue, and the speed at which the operations were carried out point to a professional. This is the information gap that the official story refuses to address. How does a man like Pacciani, who could barely write his own name, perform a clean excision of a human breast in a matter of minutes? The answer is simple: he didn't.
The investigation into the snack buddies was a masterclass in distraction. By focusing the public's attention on the lurid, satanic details of the peasants' lives, the authorities managed to steer clear of the more uncomfortable questions about the second level. The trial of Vanni and Lottie was a spectacle, a theatrical display of justice that satisfied the public's need for a culprit, while leaving the structure of the conspiracy intact. Vanni's famous outburst about his snack buddies became a catchphrase, a way to trivialize a series of murders that were anything but trivial. It was a strategy of containment, and it worked perfectly. The 1983 German tourist's murder is the rehook that continues to baffle analysts. If we accept the cult theory, then the 1983 murder might have been a contractual error, or perhaps the target wasn't the tourists themselves, but someone they were associated with. Or, more likely, it was a tactical maneuver by the monster to disrupt the police's profiling efforts. By attacking two men, he forced the investigators to reconsider everything they thought they knew about his motivations. It was a move of pure analytical genius, a way to stay one step ahead of a pursuit that was closing in. The 1985 Scopetti murder was the peak of the monster's audacity. To attack a couple in a tent, in an area that was known to be under surveillance, shows a level of confidence that can only come from knowing you are protected. The letter to Silvia Della Monica was the final taunt, a way for the monster to say that he was in control of the ending. He chose when to stop. He chose what evidence to leave behind. He chose the narrative. The fact that he was never caught after such a brazen act is the ultimate proof of the second level's influence. In the final analysis, the Monster of Florence remains the most complex mystery in the history of serial crime. It is a case that defies the boundaries of logic and the capabilities of law enforcement. It is a story of a gun that wouldn't stay buried, a ritual that wouldn't end, and a truth that was too dangerous to be told. The cold truth is that the monster is still out there, not in the sense of a man with a gun, but in the sense of a system that allows such horrors to occur and then covers them up in the name of social order. The depravity and the deception that define this case are written in the blood of the victims and the silence of the hills. The transition from the gun to the ritual marks the point where the monster became an industry. The 1981 murder of Giovanni Foggi and Carmela Denuccio was the first order. The first time the excision was performed with such cold, mechanical focus. This dual identity, shooter and surgeon, is the forensic anomaly that breaks every profile. He was gathering pieces of a puzzle that we are still trying to assemble. The 1982 failure in Montespertoli provides the pivot of strategic patience. The monster didn't return to finish the job. He waited. He watched. He learned. This is the hallmark of the mastermind, the one who is not driven by an urge, but by a plan.